Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Oh My Goodness podcast. I'm your host, Hamza Islam. My guest this week is Sam Gerry, who is a mental health activist and founder of Kick It for a Cause. It's a charity kickball tournament turned into a nonprofit organization that looks to spread awareness about suicide prevention. And this might be one of the most difficult episodes I have done because talking about suicide is never easy. Aside from his activism, he is one of my favorite people to talk to. The moment you meet him, you could just talk to him for hours. So I am really looking forward to this episode from a friendship standpoint, but I also know that this is going to be probably one of the most difficult episodes I've done. And so I hope that you guys enjoy the episode and that we also continue the conversation about mental health. Sam is the second guest, who is a mental health activist. I interviewed Seika Brown a few weeks ago. So talking about mental health, or the idea of mental health is not easy. So I'm glad that we have people like Sam and Seika as well who are involved in this form of activism. So here's my conversation with Sam Gerry. Hope you guys enjoy it. Sam Gerry, welcome to the Oh My Goodness podcast.
Yeah, Hamza, thank you for having me. I really appreciate being on.
Man, I have to tell you, before we go into talking about your journey, I just have to say you're one of the nicest, amazing people I've had the pleasure of meeting throughout this journey. And I had to remind myself that we are like on a strict time. And I say that because whenever I talk to you, normally I'll say, "Hey, Sam, can we talk for like 20 or 30 minutes?" And then usually we'll talk for like 40 or 60 minutes. So I'm like reminding myself that this is a podcast. This is the Oh My Curry Goodness podcast and not the Joe Rogan show. But I have to say, I say this in all sincereness, you are one of the most uh, genuine people I've met. And you're someone that I just love talking to. So seriously, thank you for joining. It really means a lot.
Yeah, of course. And thank you for the kind words. I always really enjoyed chatting with you, and it's been really nice to be able to have some really thoughtful discussions leading up to this. And I've really enjoyed the friendship we've been able to create, even before recording this episode. So thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we talk about mental health and your journey as a suicide prevention activist, hopefully that's like the correct terminology. I want to talk about something that means more to you, and that's golf. Because for many of us, we all have always have that one sport that means a lot to us. So for me, I've always loved soccer. It's still my favorite sport, but golf isn't just your favorite sport. It's played a huge part in your life, and I'm sure even today. So before we talk about mental health activism or anything in general, what does golf mean to you personally?
Yeah, golf means so much to me. And admittedly, like these days, it's kind of something that falls through the cracks. I think it's partially the way I portray myself on social media, but also a lot of other media appearances. Like a lot of people tend to neglect that, and it's really meant so much, really since late middle school. Being able to go out either by myself or with friends or with my dad or with my grandfather and being able to spend 4 sometimes 5 or 6 hours away from what felt like any responsibility was just so special. I still play very competitively today. I play at Bates College where I go to school, Division 3, so I'm not necessarily lighting the world on fire, but yeah, it really does mean so much to me. And another thing that a lot of people tend to forget too is golf was really the reason I got into suicide prevention activism or advocacy in the first place. One of the kind of the junior golf associations that I used to play for in high school called the American Junior Golf Association, comparable to like maybe an AAU basketball, essentially one of the most competitive golf circuits or golf tours for high schoolers. They had this program called Leadership Links, which allowed golfers or young golfers to raise funds for a cause that was important for them. I saw the opportunity and I was like, wow, this is really cool. And decided that, I had struggled with depression and anxiety and unfortunately suicidal ideation prior to that. And I was like, you know what, maybe I could do something with that. So I was looking up like top suicide prevention nonprofits. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention came up. And I guess maybe kind of the rest is history. I was able to start a really successful fundraiser. I think I raised like $1,000 in like maybe 1 or 2 hours, which is like mind boggling at the time. And that was when I really shared my story for the first time. So golf has really been so incredibly instrumental just throughout my life as a whole, and also even throughout my advocacy. And like I said, something that definitely people don't necessarily acknowledge. And golf was also the reason I got a few big media appearances, for lack of a better term. So that was pretty cool too. That was definitely a bonus. So I'll take what I can get.
Well, I do want to let you know, as much as I love talking to you, and we've obviously been really good friends the past few months, I do not want to play golf with you. I don't want to violate your Eighth Amendment rights. I'm just telling you right now, if we play golf, it's not going to go well. But I've played it. It's no, it's miserable. But
Tough
um,
sport, tough sport. Yeah.
maybe like those putt things, maybe I'll be competitive. But like once we go 18 hole, like outdoors, no, just quit the game, just forfeit. But I I want to talk about uh mental health because a few weeks ago I had the chance to interview Seika Brown, who obviously you know, and we talked a little bit about what makes mental health confusing because ultimately we don't know what a person is going through. And I want to talk about this with you because you had a personal experience and you talked about how you went through depression and you had the ideation. And what was interesting about listening or hearing your story is that it's very hard to understand what a person is going through because sometimes it's like you need to picture what like sometimes we play this game of like what does a person who's going through something look like, but what makes it confusing is that you talked about how you grew up in a I guess like a privileged background and you're someone who loves talking to people. I mean obviously with the conversations we've had, and you're someone that just loves being the best friend possible. But what we didn't understand is that you went through a period of time where you went through a dark period of your life. And so I'd love for you to talk about like how confusing it is to really understand humans, which I know this sounds philosophical, but like you get what I'm saying. It's like the sense of like, oh, we think we understand what a person is going through, and then we'll look at someone like you or someone who may not look like that, and then it's like, wait, so you were going through this situation the whole time.
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult things, especially in the case of mental illness, is that it's really, really difficult to really grasp something that's so incredibly different between each and every person. I think there's definitely this misconception out there that depression in one person will look the same in another. And that goes for all psychological disorders or psychiatric disorders, whether it be anxiety disorders or schizophrenia or something like dissociative identity disorder, bipolar disorder, you name it, it looks different in everyone. So being able to really like pinpoint exactly what that looks like and identify warning signs can be really, really tricky, especially when that individual is not presenting any warning signs at all. And that's something that can be really, really scary when looking back in hindsight. You alluded to kind of my own situation where at least to my own knowledge, with individuals that I've talked to about, kind of looking back on that period when I was struggling, whether it be with my parents or with my friends or with schoolmates, uh, or siblings, that kind of stuff, they weren't really able to identify any warning signs. And that can be really, really scary to think about someone who can struggle so deeply and not really reveal any of that, which makes the entire puzzle of understanding mental illness and psychiatric disorders, but also understanding humans so much more complex. So I think we need to, really the way that we need to be approaching these conversations surrounding mental health is kind of this acknowledgement that like, all right, maybe we really don't know. I think we go into a lot of these conversations maybe a bit too bold or a bit too brash in believing that like, all right, we have the answers and we know definitively what's going on, when in reality, like in my opinion, in discussions that I've had and research that I've read, like we have a much worse grasp of the entire spectrum of psychiatric disorders than maybe lay people tend to think. So yeah, I think really our greatest barriers and one of the most tricky things when it comes to really understanding mental illness is it's so different from person to person, and even some people it's difficult to tell because quite frankly like they aren't showing any warning signs, and unless you are able to really have a deep and meaningful conversation you would truly never know. So yeah, it's one of those things where I hope we get to some point in which we're able to, maybe find a better way of objectively identifying psychiatric disorders ethically, because I think there are a lot of like moral and ethical concerns with that as it currently stands. But yeah, sorry, I kind of rambled on there, but it's very very complex, and I don't think we're very close to solving the issue at hand.
Yeah, no, it is a really confusing topic, and I'm glad that there are people like you that are willing, that is looking at something like this and understanding how big of a problem it is, not just the United States, but around the world. Now, I want to bring back golf because, like we talked about, how you mentioned how it's played a huge part in your life, and kind of tying to your story. And I encourage anyone who's meeting Sam for the first time to go look at his journey. But what made depression confusing, especially for you personally, is that you kind of grew up, or you kind of had it, but it was almost like it started as burnout, or it's just like, oh, I just had this, I just felt like this. And what started as burnout ultimately led to depression. And then you started, I guess, you stopped caring about the one thing that has meant so much to you, which is golf. And I don't know. I mean, obviously, I have never met you 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know how big you were in terms of golf, like if you wanted to become professional, but I would love to know what that moment was like when the one thing that you cared about so much, or one thing that you love so much, you just stopped loving it. Like, what was that relationship like once you kind of like divorced from it? I think that's a terrible term,
Yeah,
but like,
yeah, but that totally makes sense. It was, I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm not exaggerating. It was probably the most scared I've ever been in my life. At the time, so as you alluded to, it was kind of like a loss of passion for the game. And at first I assumed it was burnout. I was like, all right, I'm either thinking of or playing the game, 24/7. It kind of makes sense, like unfortunate, but whatever. I tried to let it simmer. I kind of just assumed like, oh, over time, like it'll, my love for the game will either come back or I'll just kind of grow out of it and maybe I won't play golf, which was scary because at that time, like you alluded to, like I was like, oh, I'm going to be a professional golfer. This is going to be so great. This is going to be awesome. Mind you, I was in eighth grade. So maybe I didn't have a realistic grasp of the world or my world at the time. But yeah, over time, as I tried to let it simmer, it really festered into pretty serious depression. And I think um, one of the things that made it especially difficult is I had received no really kind of education or training throughout my school year, specifically in middle school or high school, regarding like what mental illness looked like or what depression looked like. I would not have been able to tell you that, loss of passion for things for people that you love was a symptom of depression, but it very much is. I maybe fell into the boat of believing that like, oh, you have to be like perpetually sad, or like this, like, or depression was like this chronic sadness, which I mean, I guess in some people it can be, but in a lot of people it's not. So yeah, really over time things got worse and worse. That unfortunately turned into pretty serious suicidality, and what was once, kind of what seemed like a short bout of burnout turned into like full blown suicidality. And I was like, went from questioning my love for the game to like questioning my will to live very very quickly. And that was really, I mean, hopefully understandably so, like really really scary. And honestly, I was probably at the time, and this might be a bit naive looking back, but like was probably more afraid to lose the game than I was afraid to lose my life, which is like really weird looking back on it, but that's how important it was to me. And yeah, so unfortunately just kind of let it fester. And of course I ended up reaching out to my parents and was able to get help and support, which was so incredibly valuable. But that few month stretch where I was kind of just raw dogging it on my own, man, it was really, really rough and really, really scary.
yeah, no, I can't imagine. I never went through the things that you went through, but what I can tell you is like I do relate to the idea of like I guess like you stop being passionate about the things you love. And so I used to have podcasts in the past, and I gave up and I gave up actually 1 year ago today, or close to a year ago today. And as I was getting ready for this podcast, like there was excitement for being able to talk to someone like you. But then at the same time, I also developed that fear of talking to people because I also use like podcasting as a form of therapy. So like for those 9 months, it's like, well, I'm scared of talking to people, but I love talking to people. So like, how do I survive those 9 months? But here I am now being able to talk to someone like you. But I want to talk about suicide ideology because or the your experience with the thought with suicide because I mean like I said I never went through it, but this was something that you went through. And like we said, when we talk about you, like it's like the fact that we don't know what a person who's going through depression or going through suicide or the thought of like committing suicide, we don't know what that looks like. It's very hard. And so for you, I'd love to know when you're going through that dark period in your life, how are you able to try to be the best version of you, or what prevented you from doing that bad thing that would ultimately affect so many people? And I know it's hard for you to understand, like it's hard for people to understand that at the time, but it's also at the same time, it's like we also don't realize that once someone commits suicide, we end up so many people become impacted by that event.
Yeah, it's really, really tricky. I think for me, one kind of thought I kept with me when I was first experiencing suicidality was that I was living for my family and not myself, which is something that's really, really difficult to grasp when you're in the throes of suicidality. But it was something that for me was like quite honestly pretty effective. Being able to live for live for my brother, my sister, my mom, my dad instead of myself was very, 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 very much kind of like a band-aid fix, but it really kept me going. Um, and a lot of times thinking about something you alluded to, the impact that my death would have on my family is something that now I don't necessarily remember how I would have perceived like how I was thinking about that back when I was in eighth grade, but now like thinking about it, that's something that horrifies me. Is thinking about what would happen in the immediate aftermath of my death, as far as mostly with my family, and a person I think about a lot is especially is my little brother, just because he means so much to me. With that being said, though, I think, and to be completely frank, I think a big reason why I didn't make any real attempt on my life is because of means accessibility. And essentially, means accessibility is this idea that, like, oh, if you have means of attempting your life, so say, for example, you have access to firearms or sharp objects or pills or something of the sort. I frankly just didn't have access to means that I was comfortable using. And that I think was what ultimately saved my life. My family doesn't keep a gun in their house. I wasn't necessarily thrilled with the idea of trying to overdose on pills because of the relatively low mortality rate of trying to overdose on pills, especially over the counter pills. Um, I think also methods that were like very, very painful, were things that I was not very interested in. So, yeah, there was certainly a mindset that went into it, in thinking about like, oh, I don't want to die because of my family, but also like I can tell you with relative certainty that if I had a firearm easily accessible to me, I probably would have, if not attempted, and with a firearm, I probably would have died. I would have attempted or come very, very close to attempting. So yeah, I think there's some good and some bad there. The one thing I will say is trying to will yourself out of suicidality is significantly more challenging than I think anyone will ever realize. And frankly, I don't really know if it's even possible. But yeah, I think it's a bit of a mix of both. And I think they both worked in unison to kind of keep me alive and hold me in there for that difficult stretch.
Yeah, no, and I think going back to what you said, I can't understand the difficult period that you had to go through, but there's always a sense of if something happens, how does that impact my community or like my group or my close friends or my close circle? And once you realize that, and it's hard to understand that, but like once you do get to that, it's like, oh wow, this will affect so many people. And I applaud you for the fact that here you are today, and you have obviously a great support system of your community, your friends, and your family that have really helped you into the person you are today. But something that you and I have in common, which is how the time of the day can play an effect on our mood. And I never went through depression or suicide, but I can't imagine that for you when you're going through that, I feel like, especially at night, that situation could be worse. Like for me, I don't like the dark. So that's why we're recording a podcast in the evening. But like there's certain times where I like if it's during the evening, I'm not 100% right. Not like sad, but it's like I feel a little like gloomy. But I do want to talk about how much for you personally the mood, or like whether it's like night or like wintertime, how much it made your situation worse. Because going through depression is one thing, but then when it's at night or when it's like the day is shorter, that's what I mean. I can't imagine like it made it much more difficult.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite frankly, it's kind of switched up for me over time as far as the time of day where I kind of perceive things to be worse. I think at sometimes it's a lot of times at night, and other times it's been in the morning. I think one kind of similarity between those two, or maybe something that plays into it, is just having a lot of time to myself. Not having really the opportunity to or maybe not having the opportunity to seek out distraction in a way that's social and that like I'm connecting with others. So I think that certainly played a role into it. I remember at the very beginning, kind of going back to eighth grade freshman year, the nighttime was brutal. I remember I would spend quite literally, I was like searching, like spending time searching online, like, oh, how do I've lost passion for, I think I quite literally wrote like, oh my gosh, I lost passion for golf. How do I fall in love with it again? Like, looking back on it, like I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that because that's like a kind of a silly thing to Google. But yeah, like it was brutal. Like just so bad. Just beating up myself so badly. Experiencing like really intense suicidality, and also I'm very much not familiar with this line of work as much as I am suicide and self-injury, but also kind of just like self-sabotage. So not necessarily like harming myself in like a self-injurious way, but like doing things that would like hurt me, as far as like doing poor in school, or like thinking about doing poor in school, or like um gosh, there were many things I thought of. I remember once I was like, oh, I should like swap my house right now. And I'm like, what is going on inside my brain? So yeah, like the nighttime was brutal, and just like so many racing thoughts about so many different things in ways that I could just like destroy myself or destroy my life. I think I've definitely had spouts where it's bad in the mornings, albeit not as bad as at night. I think a lot of times I wake up and I'm like, oh, I am just like not looking forward to today, or not looking forward to this week, and not necessarily in the way that like maybe a lot of people would experience it, because I think I think I could make a case for everyone experiencing that to some extent at some point in their lives. But it was really just kind of this, oh gosh, I can't get out of bed. I can't go take a shower. I can't brush my teeth. I just can't do it. So yeah, that's certainly played a role. As far as the seasons go, I'm not necessarily sure. Like I'm sure it's had some impact on me at some point in my life, whether it be via like seasonal affective disorder or something of the sort. Although I've never had that like officially diagnosed or anything. But yeah, it's I think time of day has really been the big kicker for me. And it's something that doesn't affect me as much now, fortunately. But at the beginning, it was something that really got to me in a really big way, and it was really scary.
I want to transition into the topic of hope, because you're going through this period of time, and obviously it's not going to be a quick fix. I know, well, no, I don't know, but I can imagine for you, there was a point in time in your life where something clicked, and ultimately it didn't solve everything, but it did open the door for you to be a part of that healing journey. And for you, that was the Masters, which anyone who's not aware of, that's it's a golf tournament where some of the best golfers in the world compete. I think that's what it is. I don't know. There's so many golf tournaments. Um, but your family, like you said, has played a big part in your life, and I think it was you took a trip with your grandpa to go to the Masters, and that started a that changed something and it allowed you to, I don't know, not say to be in a better mood, but it allowed you to see life differently. Do you remember exactly what that moment was? Whether it was just the tournament itself, or if there was one particular event where you saw it and it just changed everything for you.
Yeah, so I think you pretty much hit it on the head as far as the Masters. For those who are unfamiliar, it's arguably the really the biggest and most important tournament in professional golf. It's held at Augusta National Golf Club in Augusta, Georgia. Really, really big deal. Also, really, really hard to get tickets. I know people say it's comparable to like the Super Bowl. I don't actually know how easy or not. Like, I know it's not easy to get tickets. I don't know how technically it compares to the Super Bowl. But yeah, and the reason why that was so impactful was because I think it was, what was it, 2016 when I first started experiencing, February 2016, I believe, if I remember correctly, when I first experienced depression and kind of that burnout from golf for the very first time. And it was, I think, only a month later where I found out I was going to Augusta National, which was like, whoa, like was so unbelievable. So and the Masters is in April, so it was um, what, like two months or so um after first kind of experiencing some of that depression and burnout and just loss of passion. Admittedly, like at the beginning I wasn't very excited. I had a very emotionally blunted response. But then getting there was like, it was like magical, man. It was great. As a golf junkie, like that is truly the mecca of golf. And I was like, wow, like if if this can be as incredible as it is, maybe there's something to live for. So while it wasn't necessarily like it didn't change everything, I was like, wow, like this is really, really special. And I think maybe in part like it gave me something to aspire to. At that time I was still like very naively pushing for a career in professional golf. But yeah, and I think more importantly than anything, being able to do it with my grandfather, who I had spent so much time playing golf with. um and really just being able to cherish that moment was well, honestly, probably, one of the greatest moments of my life, if not the greatest moment of my life.
I can't imagine. Now, the one thing I would say is I'm not a golf junkie, but I am a cricket junkie because South Asians love playing cricket, and that is one of my favorite sports. I'm just thinking to myself, like, there are people that like, and I used to be one of those people that like, no one who watches golf, and then as become a cricket fan, people are like, who watches cricket? And I'm like, you know what, fair point. But I'll say this: it's one of those things where like, as unless you are not like passionate about the game, you'll never fully understand what it means to a person. So like if you and I were going to like the Masters and you're talking about golf, I'd be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I know how much this means to you, so like I get it. But
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
no, I actually would love to go to the Masters. I honestly, because I there are a few golf tournaments where I'm from. So maybe one day, and then I'll be like, okay, now I understand why so many people love golf. But you you obviously have been able to share your experience dealing with depression and suicide, and I know, like, and I'll admit this was probably one of the most difficult episodes I've done because how sensitive this topic can be. But I firstly thank you for letting me be able to talk to you about this, and secondly, this was something that a few years ago you did an op-ed about how golf saved your life, and a lot of the things that we are talking about today goes back to where you were able to be vulnerable and share your experience with quote unquote the rest of the world. I would love for you to know if you had a certain goal in mind. We're going to talk about like the negative aspect later, but I do want to talk about if when you're sharing your experience, was this more of like, let me get this out of my chest, or do you feel like it was more about, let's hope that there was someone else out there that's going through the same thing as I am? What was the original goal like?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think admittedly I was naive to the point where I didn't really know what my goal or objective was. I was kind of like, let me throw this against the wall and see if it sticks. So maybe more along the lines of, all right, I'm gonna put this out there. Like maybe it resonates with a few people. So yeah, there admittedly there wasn't like a super concrete goal. Should I have set one? I don't know, maybe, maybe not. But yeah, what was I think at the time just like pretty ill informed to where like, oh, I didn't have like any expectations. I was like, oh, this could go great, this could go terribly. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes.
When you're explaining it, now let's talk about the negative aspect because like we said, if I'm someone who's known you, let's say like we've I've known each other, I've known you since high school or during that period when you were going through that, and you're I'm reading this and I'm going, oh, okay, so Sam really went through the situation. But then there's also the sense of like, wait, like you really went through this? I didn't know that about you. And oftentimes when we share our personal experiences, we get criticisms for two reasons. Either one, like we have our intentions, but then other people interpret it where it's like, okay, wait, we need like you need help, like in the most brutal, like in the most rude way possible. You need help. Or like you are now going into places where it's like, wait, I didn't mean to say it that way. I just wanted to share you my experience. And then there are also going to be people that will say, oh, you're just looking for attention, like because obviously like we've all made mistakes and not every one of us is perfect. We have had our flaws, but it's very easy for people to go, oh, like you're just looking for attention or this is just your way of trying to get something for no reason. Did you ever worry about that? And did you well, actually, firstly, did you receive those kind of comments? And secondly, did you ever worry about that when you first started the idea of sharing your story?
Yeah, it was definitely something that I thought of quite a bit, and admittedly something I still think about. I think about especially not only the way that my diagnosis impacts my image, but also the way just my advocacy work in general impacts my image. That's a bit of a different discussion, though. As far as like what I've received or what I've heard, though, I have not run into any of that, which I find to be like particularly interesting. I think it's in part maybe because of my, at least in part because of my privileged background. I mean, I'm a straight upper middle class white guy, able bodied. Like, I'm privileged in the sense that like, all right, maybe for some of those reasons, I wouldn't catch as much flack. Um, Also, I think I grew up in a community that was so incredibly supportive, and I think that goes back to part of my privileged identity. And I think another thing as well is that within the um, I think the one thing that when it comes to talking about mental health, at least in the Northeast where I'm from, is that in a lot of spaces, and kind of going back to the idea of like my community being incredibly supportive in Woburn, Massachusetts, is it's not nearly as controversial as some other things are. At least like people aren't outspoken about some of their concerns or worries with it. With that being said, I'm sure there are plenty of people who have either thought certain things or said them to other people behind their back. I think that's fair, but I personally have not heard any of it, for better or for worse.
Let's transition into your organization, Kick It for a Cause, because I know this was something you worked with one of your friends, and it is a for those who don't know, I mentioned this introduction. It's a kickball tournament, but it's also a nonprofit where you all the proceeds go to an organization that spreads awareness about suicide prevention. Now, you are a golf guy, but Kick It for a Cause is a kickball tournament. So what led to kickball? And secondly, and I know this might be a stupid question because ultimately your goal is obviously to spread awareness about suicide prevention because given that there are so many people that are impacted by it, did the sport really like how much did the sport matter? Was it just like let's like was that ever a stressful thing or was it more just hey, let's come up with a way for people to have fun but also spread awareness about an issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, huge shout out to Noah Dollywall, and Emily Correa. They're two of my friends from high school who we really started this thing all together. Noah's the co-founder with me, and Emily now is our executive director, but she went to high school with us. As far as like the sport, so the initial idea was to host some kind of intramural sport. We didn't really want to do golf because there are a lot of fundraisers for different causes of really like any like whether it be like cancer or substance abuse or that kind of stuff. And we felt that space was very saturated. And admittedly, golf is a pretty inaccessible sport, albeit those those tournaments raise a ton of money, but that's besides the point. We wanted to do something in intramural sport that would be fun and something that was very approachable. As far as what sport we did, though, it was kind of not necessarily an arbitrary decision, but we quite literally left it up to an Instagram poll. I think it was either between kickball and dodgeball or kickball and can jam. I know that with dodgeball, obviously, there's quite a bit of liability there. So we are like, all right, maybe not that one. But then I think the majority vote was kickball, and we were like, all right, we're now we're rocking with kickball. So yeah, that's kind of that. It was a relatively arbitrary decision. I think the story's kind of funny. It literally came down to an Instagram poll. But yeah, that's really where we got started.
What has the experience been like? Has it been like a fun kind of tournament, or has it been like competitive? Like, hey, we're here to win. What has it been like?
Yeah, it's tricky because we get people who come from both angles. So there we have I'd say probably maybe a little less than half of our teams who are there like, oh, we're gonna have a good time. Where we've had some teams who have pre-gamed the tournament before. Not gonna name any names. Some people who are just coming out looking to have a good time, connect with the community, and then people who are like so hardcore, like come in uniforms, have like routines, get like really really mad over a charity kickball tournament. It's a little sad, but I'm not going to make any further comment on that. But yeah, it's totally mixed, and it makes it fun. I kind of feel bad for the teams who are there just to have fun, because sometimes those teams that are competitive are maybe a bit frustrating to play or a bit frustrating to deal with, especially when they get a bit shouty, especially to the umpires and stuff or the refs. But yeah, it's a mix of both, which is a good time. But we just try to keep everyone civil out there.
Now, you don't just focus on suicide prevention, but you also focus on teen mental health, sleep, and social media, which has been, I mean, for many of us who are our age, we are we use we have a horrible relationship with that. We spend a lot of time on social media. Sometimes we don't get enough sleep, and there's always going to be at least one person that will go, I spend a lot of time on social media, I don't have any problems. Or I don't sleep that much, I don't have any problems. But for you, given that you are focusing on these three things, how important is it to understand that this is an actual problem? Like if you do spend a lot of time on social media, it affects your mental health. That if you don't get enough sleep, I think we're supposed to have like 7 or 8 hours, but if you spend like 3 or 4 hours, that affects your mental health. There are people that will obviously disagree with you, but for you as someone who's involved in this kind of research, how important is it to understand that these things can affect your mental health one way or another?
Yeah, it's so incredibly important, and it's a lot of fun to be able to more or less like kind of be on the front lines as far as engaging with the literature and the research. Totally shameless plug to the Hamilton Lab out of Rutgers University. Our principal investigator is Dr. Jessica Hamilton. I think our Instagram handle is, if you look up the Hamilton Lab, you'll find it. It's like a red H with a star, but where we post a bunch of infographics and stuff. But yeah, I think one thing that a lot of people don't understand is like the three are very much intertwined: mental health, social media, and sleep. And if you think about it, prolonged social media use at night will ultimately, can ultimately cause you to go to sleep later. And if you're sleeping less, like that will have an impact on your mental health. It is very well known within the literature that, sleep issues or sleep quality issues can lead to subsequent suicidality and worsened well-being or perceived well-being in general. So it's one of those things where science communication is really, really important. As it currently stands, a lot of the literature is very inaccessible. There's a lot of like sciencey jargon. Doesn't quite make a lot of sense to lay people, which is really unfortunate. So I'm really, really proud of really our entire lab, and it's really cool to see Dr. Hamilton really emphasize the importance of communicating this information in hopefully really effective ways. Like I alluded to earlier, we're on Instagram, we're also on TikTok. So really, really cool to be able to see the meld between science and teens and kind of lay people in general. So that's been a lot of fun. And I mean, in some, like I really can't overstate the importance of like being educated on the impacts that social media, sleep, and mental health can have on kind of our health and well-being, both positive and negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And now we talked about the past version of you. We're talking about the present. I want to talk about the future. Now, I know correct me if I'm wrong, kick it there. You guys are hosting another Kick It for a Cause tournament, I think 2 or 3 months from now. I'm sure you're really excited about that. But I'd love to know what the future looks like for you and for Kick It for a Cause, because obviously you've worked on Kick It for a Cause, I think since like 2018, 2019, and I know it's going to continue going on. Is there something that you would like to see at some point? And then for you personally, what's next for you? And do we see, because I know you talked about how in eighth grade you wanted to become a professional golfer. Is that dream now, is that dream now gone?
Yeah, so to start with Kick It, I think a lot of it is it's really all on a year by year basis.
Yeah.
We at first we had this, so we started Kick It in high school. We first had to make the transition from high school to undergrad. We didn't know how that would go. Noah's at Boston College, I'm at Bates College, which is in Maine, so I had to deal with that kind of geographical um, gap. That's a terrible way of wording it, but you get the picture. Not always being near each other. And I think, next year, we're both juniors right now. Next year, when we graduate, a lot is going to be up in the air. My plan in the future is to go to graduate school, plan to pursue a PhD in either clinical psych or related field. I know Noah has had some plans in the past about potentially going to law school. So, like, trying to juggle the nonprofit and the kickball tournament after that, well, certainly not impossible, will become, significantly more challenging. So, but with that being said, I don't see it being the end of Kick It. I think one thing we've always had in the back of our minds is, letting someone inherit it. And I think that's a process that will start relatively soon. But with that being said, Noah, myself, and Emily are still very much into this. We're so excited to have our what's this now, our fourth annual tournament, which is kind of wild. I actually kind of forget the date. I think it's either May or 20th or 21st, whatever that Saturday is. But yeah, it's going to be a really really great time. As far as the golf stuff goes, unfortunately, maybe not the career path for me. Professional golf, as far as careers go, is kind of interesting. So there's a professional golfer and a golf professional, and they're two very distinct careers.
Okay.
So professional golfer is someone that you see on TV. They're playing golf tournaments for a lot of money, traveling on a week to week basis, whereas a golf professional is someone who works at a country club, usually more on the business side of things, running a golf shop, managing operations, that kind of stuff. Sometimes golf professionals also do a bit of instruction. More teaching pros do that though, which is like another sub career. So like maybe if like all the clinical psychology stuff and like the mental health stuff goes horribly wrong for some reason or another, maybe I'll explore golf again. I mean, oh, it's a possibility, but fingers crossed. I'm definitely really excited about I guess maybe my future prospects in the world of suicidology, suicide prevention, and mental health in general. So fingers crossed that all goes well.
Yeah, I can't tell which one to root for, the mental health or the golf. I don't know. Before I let you go, I want to bring your story full circle, because we talked about how you went through depression and you went through the suicidal thoughts, and now here you are spreading awareness about suicide prevention or suicide prevention. You're doing research on teen mental health, sleep, and social media. And when you go through when you go through like your past, it's very easy to just, I guess for lack of a better phrase, run away from it as far away from it as possible. But here you are now going almost back into this, like doing the research that you were once going through during you're doing research on something where there was that dark period of time. So for you, how are you able to focus on these issues without kind of going back into who you once were, if that makes sense?
Yeah. I think part of that is definitely maybe a sense of detachment. I think in a lot of ways when I'm doing this work, I detach myself from my past emotional experiences. And I think that's more something that happens implicitly rather than explicitly. Um, I think also I'm so lucky in this space to be surrounded by like so many incredible resources and coping strategies and support resources and all of that stuff, to where I think if I were to be in that situation again, I would be very well prepared. With that being said, however, I think there's no real way to prevent prevent falling into that, or prevent with certainty, whether it's falling into a depressive episode or like a suicidal episode. So I think it's really being as prepared as I can in case that happens, and I feel like I've been able to do that pretty well. But yeah, I think kind of some kind of detachment and having just so many great resources at my to my avail is what really keeps me going successfully.
Actually, while you were talking about that, I want to bring up one more thing because I also think this is
Yeah.
important. As a mental health activist, suicide prevention activist, it's very easy for people to forget that like you don't know all the answers. And especially in a field that there's so much research going in, it's very easy to be like, so Sam, what do you think? Or what should I take? Or what should I do so I don't fall into this? And I want to bring this up because I think on your Instagram bio, please forgive me for stalking you, but it was for research. But and you also told me how you want to let people know that you are a suicide prevention activist, but you're not an expert. And so for you, have you had those conversations where you had to tell people that you don't know the answer? Which I know sounds cliche, but like there is a difference between not wanting to help and not wanting to give the wrong answer because they're not always the same thing.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Yeah, I think it's admittedly those conversations where I'm like, all right, I'm not a professional. I don't know how to help for sure. I feel like those conversations happen more often than not. And is part of the reason why I put that in my bio on Instagram. I am, I'm 21 years old. I'd like to think I have a good grasp on this stuff, but I really don't. And even like suicide specifically is what I focus on, is so incredibly complex that even a lot of professionals don't have I mean, I don't think anyone has a complete grasp on suicide. It's so incredibly fascinating and intricate, and is really one of the most um tragic human behaviors, and I'm trying to understand why and the ways in which we can prevent it, and what it all means. Like no one knows. So like while I'm certainly like really in the thick of it in this space, I feel like the more I'm exposed to in this space, the more I realize, wow, I feel like very unqualified to give advice. So while I certainly can help in some situations, say someone asked me like, oh, what are some good resources? Like I'm great at dishing out like as many resources as you want. I've got so many. But as far as like, oh, I am I am hypothetical situation, like someone asked me, oh, someone recently in my life just attempted suicide, like what should I do? I'm like, uh-oh. Like in my mind I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have an answer to that question. So I'll certainly like do everything I can to help to point them in the right direction, but like I don't have a definitive answer, and I'm very very sorry for that. So yeah, sorry, I tried to ramble on there, but yeah, it's really really tricky, really really complex, and I think it's inappropriate of me as a 21-year-old who hasn't even gotten out of undergrad to be dogmatic and really be kind of drinking the Kool-Aid and thinking that I'm all that and I have all the answers. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, and hey, suicide, depression, mental health is definitely it's a very complex topic or complex fields. And the fact that you're being involved in this, I mean, I applaud you for that because it's something that was personal to you. And now here you are saying, hey, let me do this so that people in the future don't have to live in a world where this becomes a problem. So, you've been such a big part in trying to make the world a better place. I know that might sound cliche, but I really do mean that. So, I mean, seriously, thank you so much for being able to share your story and for being vulnerable and for being able to be involved in this because it's not easy. And I mean, props to you for being able to say, look, let's have a conversation. Let's find a way to make this let's find a way to make this not a bad thing, or let's find a way to stop this from being an issue. And it's going to take some time, but I can't stress enough the fact that you're doing an amazing thing, so I appreciate you for that.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hamza. I really appreciate that.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you like what you saw, feel free to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. I hope you guys continue to support this podcast, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next episode.